Hello serverless people, welcome to another video on serverless, and in this one I'm going to show you how to use Custom Authorizer with Auth0. So let's say you have a backend server with API gateway and Lambda and you want to protect some of those API to only authorize users. So you want only users with a JWT to be able to call those API. How you can do it if you're using Auth0, I'm going to show you this in this video, so stay tuned. The idea here is to use a custom authorizer on your API gateway. So every time there is a request, the custom authorizer is going to check if the token is in the header. If not, it's going to give an authorized response. So 401 for unauthorized users. If authorization is successful, is going to just use the API as it is. Auth0 is a very popular authorization platform, and it's not like, officially kind of supported, officially integrated, let's say, with AWS as Cognito is. So that's why when I tried to use it, it was a bit difficult. That's why I'm doing this tutorial. So if you are in the same use case, stay tuned because I'm going to show you how to do it. So now let's move to the Auth0 dashboard and let's get into it. Alright, so let's assume you have a project in Auth0. You go on the Applications API and you create a new API. In this case, I create a Serverless Authorizer for the example. You go in here and you need to get some of the information such as the identifier, the JWT issuer that I'm going to show you later when we go through the code. And also in useful information, if you go in here on the Test tab, you can get JWT that we can use to test the API authorization. Now let's move to the architecture. Here is how it's going to work. So let's assume you have a client-side application. Here is your user. Your user logs in using Auth0 and then it has a JWT. If the user wants to call an API which is under the custom authorizer, it has to send a request with an authorization header. The header will contain the JWT that has been given on step 2. So what is going to happen is that when the user calls the API with the authorization header with the JWT, the API gateway will forward this header to the custom authorizer. The custom authorizer will verify the JWT against Auth0 using the API, and if the verification is successful, is going to call the protected AWS Lambda. And then the Lambda is going to reply to the user, and the API gateway will forward the response to the user. If on step 4 the authorization fails, what is going to happen is that the API gateway will return an unauthorized response to the user. Okay, so with the architecture in mind, now I'm going to show you the service from the code and also how to deploy it. For this use case, I'm using CDK. So what we have to create is 2 Lambda functions and 1 API gateway. Here I'm defining the first one, so the kind of, the application Lambda function, which is basically the protected one, the one that is going to be called if the authentication is successful. This is the function that actually performs the Auth0 authentication. And as you can see, I'm passing a few environment variables to be able to verify the JWT using Auth0. So environment variables are in this case defined in here as a config file. Here I set a config JSON file to show you the example. So basically the URI is your subdomain, your Auth0 subdomain, which is basically the application name, and a predefined JSON file. This is needed for Auth0 to verify that is your application trying to do the JWT verification. The issuer is basically the same thing, so your Auth0 subdomain, and the audience is the API identifier. What it means is basically the ID that is being provided once you create the API. So it's if you go in your API settings, is the one called identifier. Okay, so I'm passing those value to the Lambda function. It's going to do the authorization. Next thing I'm doing is creating the API gateway, And then to the API gateway, I am attaching the authorizer. So as you can see it here, I'm saying the handler is the auth lambda, which is the one that we define up in here. Identity resources, I'm saying, please get the JWT from the authorization header. And here I just say, do not cache this request. Then I want to add, well, I'm going to do a post request for this example, but depending on our use case, it can be a get, a put, or whatever. Then I'm basically adding this method to the API gateway that I defined, saying add method post, and authorizer is the authorizer in here, and authorization type is going to be custom. So with this stack in CDK, you can just deploy it and you're going to have the architecture that we've seen in here. So the API gateway, the custom authorizer, and the Lambda function. If you go again to the code, the protected function is nothing interesting. It's just like showing that it's working. And the custom authorizer is basically a code that I've taken from Auth0 GitHub repo. I'm gonna put a link in the description of this video, but it's basically what it's doing is getting the token, so getting the token from the authorization header, doing a few checks, and then calling the get signing key function to basically check and decode the JWT. If all these checks are successful, it's going to be a successful response to the API gateway, and then the API gateway can actually call the protected function. So I already deployed this stack in AWS, so what I want to show you now is how it looks like on my AWS account. So this is the API gateway that's been created. As you can see in here, we have the post method that I created before. And then here we have the basically the graph showing you the client, method request, integration request, and the Lambda function. If you go in here on the request settings, we can see the authorization pointing to this service. What is this service? Is basically the Lambda function. And it's actually, you can see in here, Lambda function, secure API gateway, and it's like a very long name, but it's basically what we defined before. And here you can even test the authorization if you want to test it in here, but I'm going to do it with Postman later. And if we go back on the post in here, you will see the, as I said, the custom authorizer, then the Lambda function is going to be in here. Lambda function is defined in here, and then the response is just like the response, not doing anything, not like any changes on the response. So we've seen in here the API gateway with the Lambda function integration and the custom authorizer. What I want to do now is actually showing you how it works. So here I have a Postman request. I am setting the authorization in here. So this is the token that I've taken from, as I showed you before, if you go on the test tab in here, you can get a JWT to be able to test the API. So if I go back to Postman, here I define my JWT. You can actually see in here, you see authorization header, bearer, and then the value of the JWT. So if I send the request, I'm expecting to get the message from the Lambda function. So hello from Secure API Gateway Custom Authorizer, which is basically this code in here. But what happens now if I provide a wrong JWT? Let's say I change something in here, I delete the last few chars and I send. I would expect the authorizer to not pass the authorization. And as you can see in here, we have status 401 message unauthorized. And if we put the token back again, the correct one, now it should work. Yeah, okay, it works. As you can see, if you want to protect your API using Auth0, this is how it's done, using a custom authorizer. Alright, thanks for watching. I'm going to leave the code on my GitHub repo. You can find it in the description of the video. Let me know if you have, any comments, if you like this type of video. If you can just hit the like button, it helps me a lot to create new ones. The next one I'm going to create, I think it's going to be with Cognito as a custom authorizer. Let me know what you think, yeah, and thanks again for watching.